Hey there, everyone. Welcome to lesson 8 of our Frankenstein unit. Just one more lesson after this, and we are done for the year. So, we really just have one major concept that I wanted to make sure we talked about before the end of the school year, before we finish 10th grade, and that is the concept of point of view. So, our goal for today is first that you would understand the concept, and then that you'd be able to identify the point of view of several sample passages and evaluate or decide the advantages and disadvantages of each one. So, point of view. Whenever you are in a story or a movie, point of view has to do with the perspective from which the story is told. Who is the narrator who is telling the story? The main types are first person, second person, and third person. First person being I, me, or my, I'm the character telling the story. Second person is when you use the pronoun you. It's usually like an outside or like a character in the story. So, point of view. Point of view has to do with the perspective from which the story is told. So, in a book or a movie, who is the narrator? Who is the main person telling the story? The main types of point of view are first person, second person, and then third person. And amidst the third person point of view, there are three different types that we're going to look at: objective, omniscient, and limited. Now, in literature, in stories, it is very rare to almost never that you have a second person narrator. It's very difficult to do. So, most books, like 99% of books, are going to be in first person or one of the three third persons. So, there's really four point of views that we're going to look at today. The way you decide what is the point of view of the story is to look at the pronouns. So, if they are using a lot of I, me, my, or mine, that's going to point you to its first person. It's one character telling the story from their own experience. If you're seeing pronouns like he, she, him, his, her, they, them, or the characters' names, that's going to tell you it's third person. Now, once you know it's third person, then you ask yourself, how many characters do we get to see inside their head? If you get to see in a bunch of characters' heads, you get to hear all of their thoughts and their feelings and their emotions, then that's omniscient, or at least more than two characters. If you get to only hear from one character, so for example, Harry Potter, you get to hear Harry's thoughts and feelings, but you don't get to know anyone else's thoughts or feelings, but it's still told in third person. We call that limited. We're limited to one character. And then stories that don't tell you any thoughts or feelings, it's just purely the action and events of the story. That's an objective story. Okay, so we're going to look at some sample passages and see if we can figure out which type of point of view it is. So, first passage: Bella knew she wouldn't find anything, but she couldn't stop herself from checking. Every morning she peered in the empty room, both hoping and not hoping to see her sister there. Only the cat knew her madness, and he was greatly confused. So we have two characters, Bella, and in this scene, the cat. We know what Bella knows. We know that she was hoping and not hoping. So we have insight into Bella's thoughts and feelings. We have pronouns that say she, so we know it's third person. We can at least see into one character's perspective. But we also know that the cat knew something and that he was confused. So if we know how two characters are feeling and it's third person pronouns, that's going to teach us that it's third person omniscient. Let's try the second one. Chris finished breakfast and ran down the stairs. His mother, meanwhile, hurriedly packed his bag and grabbed his warmest gloves and coat. Chris would be late, but at least he would be warm. Okay, so we have two characters, Chris and his mother. It's third person, there's no third person pronouns. But I don't see into their emotions. We just have verbs. He finished breakfast, he ran. She hurried, packed the bag, grabbed his coat. He would be warm. So this is what we call objective. There's no thoughts or feelings from any of the characters. Okay, the next two passages you're going to try on your own. So the first one: it was times like these when I thought my father, who hated guns and had never been to any wars, was the bravest man who ever lived. Which point of view is this? Okay, hopefully you guessed right. That should be an easy one. It is first person, right? We have those first person pronouns like I. Let's look at the next one. After all he had been through, Meek wasn't about to go back to that place. The frigid cells, the all consuming loneliness and curiosity of the outside world. Still, he was tempted to join them. Okay, so do your best guess of what point of view it is. Okay, the only one we have left is third person limited. So it's third person, we have Meek and he, but we do get to know one character's thoughts and feelings, that he felt tempted, that he was lonely. Um, so we have one character's thoughts and feelings that is third person limited. Okay, each of the point of views has advantages and disadvantages. There's positive reasons for using that point of view, but there are some drawbacks as well. First person, when a story is told from the main character's point of view, like The Hunger Games or that The Hate You Give, you get a deep connection with that main character. You really get an insight into their thoughts and feelings and emotions. The disadvantage, you only get to see the story from that one perspective. In Hunger Games, it'd be cool if you could know what Peeta or Gale or President Snow was thinking or feeling, but we only have Katniss's perspective. For third person omniscient, when the narrator knows everything, you get insight into all the characters' thoughts. You get to know how every character in the story is thinking and feeling. The disadvantage is that you don't really get to know any one character deeply. You kind of have a more shallow knowledge of all of the characters. So, kind of the opposite of first person. Third person limited, you still get to know one single character well, like Harry Potter. And we say without bias because when one character is telling the story from their own perspective, it's going to be biased towards how they would tell it, right? If you got in a fight and I asked you the story, you would tell it very different than the other person you got in a fight with. They would see the fight from a very different perspective. If it's third person, we get the kind of fight from an outside perspective, but we still get to know one of the characters really well. So that's why there's an advantage to that. The disadvantage, like first person, you don't get perspectives from any other characters. You only see one character's thoughts and feelings. And the last one, objective, you get all the facts, you get the information, it's direct, it's fast paced, it's all the action. The disadvantage, of course, though, is that you don't get to hear from any characters. Okay, so for today's lesson, we talked a little bit about point of view. We practiced identifying it in passages. When you're done with this video, you will have completed your Edpuzzle video. You are going to read and answer questions for chapters 20 and 22 of Frankenstein. Tagged with this assignment, you'll see a link to a YouTube video where I read chapter 20 for you. So you just really have to read chapter 22 on your own. So make sure while you read, you're answering the guided reading questions in your master packet and completing your focus skill. For your focus skill, you're going to highlight 3 to 5 examples of the point of view in these chapters. You're then going to write a 2 to 3 sentence response in which you identify what that point of view is and discuss the advantages and disadvantages of using that point of view. So if you're noticing that it's in first person, highlight some examples of first person and tell me it's first person and here's the advantages and disadvantages of that. If you think it's third person limited, you'll do the exact same thing. And I will post a screenshot of this image in today's assignment as well. So if you need to reference the advantages and disadvantages of the different point of views, you can do so. Reach out if you have any questions.